Broadcasting live from our New England studio, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Nutanix in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thank you for joining us for today's Nutanix Cloud Native Masterclass, an educational forum designed for leaders who are steering their organizations through rapid change, accelerating innovation, and preparing for an AI-powered future. As we all know, cloud native has moved far beyond being a technology trend. It's become a foundational strategy for modern enterprise, enabling greater speed, flexibility, and operational consistency across data centers, public clouds, and the edge, while helping reduce platform sprawl and operational complexity. Today, we'll explore how this architectural approach not only simplifies complexity and reduces risk, but also creates the scalable backbone required to support modern AI workloads. To guide you through this discussion today, we have two distinguished experts. First, Dr. Art Langer. He's the Associate Vice Provost and Director of the Center for Technology Management and Digital Leadership at Northeastern University. A renowned author, professor, and advisor to global CIOs, Art brings a deep perspective on organizational transformation and the evolving role of technology leadership in driving business value. And joining him is Parag Karnik, CTO of Enterprise Platforms at Nutanix, and a seasoned cloud and AI innovator with extensive experience building and scaling modern platforms. Parag has helped some of the world's largest enterprises adopt cloud-native architectures with the governance and clarity required at the C-suite level. Together, they'll break down what cloud-native really means for digital-first strategies, how it enables rapid development and deployment, and why it's becoming essential for AI-driven enterprises. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Art Langer and Parag Karnik. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm ready to go.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to hand things over to you. I'll let you take it from here. I know you're going to then bring Parag into the program, and he's going to walk through his presentation. And then when you're all finished wrapping things up, I'll jump back in and we'll catch up at the end.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. Well, I'm, as always, super excited to be here and to talk about a very provocative issue, which is a change, of course, but an amazing opportunity for technology leaders around the world. And what I'm going to be covering are some of the things that are going on from a strategic point of view at board levels, business levels, and of course, I'll be passing things on to Parag to talk about a little bit more of the technical and infrastructure capabilities. But let's start with probably a very important concept here, right? And that is the CIO executive mandate. What are you going to be responsible for in competing in the AI era? Because even though we're talking about cloud native, it's really under the auspices of what artificial intelligence is doing, or the era of it. And let's face it, AI is reshaping growth, productivity, competitiveness in new and different ways. Your role is not just about supporting anymore. Obviously, you still have to do that. You still have to keep the lights on, efficiencies and controls. But it's going beyond that with cloud native, because it's the foundation of scalable AI. And because of that, technology is now a common and everyday discussion and a board level growth lever on what we're doing. And the CIO accountability is really being focused in speed and trust and value. And one other thing that I'll add here, you need to focus so much more on outcomes, not necessarily just uptime. So you've got this two-front piece that you're dealing with, right? Got to keep everything going. But now it's about strategy and outcomes and helping the businesses grow and compete. Why is cloud native enabling the AI advantage? Let's look at that a little bit more. Obviously some of this, AI requires elastic on-demand compute. We're now moving to more modular platforms that are accelerating time to market, more of our dynamic existence. APIs are turning data and models into products. Let me just stop there for a minute. What we're seeing is that all of these AIPs are creating sub-products that can be dynamically put together to fit client needs and opportunities that are out there. So it's not just like we have fixed type of products and services. We have dynamic capabilities to provide specific product developed, and legacy IT limits that AI scale and speed. So everything has got to be moving over into this cloud native advantage because it adds this dynamism, as I would call it, in the ability to change and modify and personalize applications as we expand not only to B2B, but also to B to consumers. The enterprise AI platform vision is that we're going to have it in one place, right? Not physically in one place, but to be able to go to one place and get many business outcomes. This requires sharing of data, sharing of AI processes, and certainly sharing of application services, which inevitably, and this is a very powerful piece, it's going to eliminate the duplication and shadow of AI, all right? You don't want AI going on all over the place. You want to give people that ability, but at the same time, centralize it enough so that you can utilize everything that's available in one place. What does that result in? It's going to enable faster innovation and reduce that risk. So data as a strategic asset, let me just move into that area. One of the things in these courses that I've done many, many times is I've told the CIO community, data is really your only asset. Well, you know what? That's changing. Data is the asset, but AI performance, depending on that data quality and access, gives technology leaders yet another importance. The whole AI infrastructure and strategy, which depends on data, heightens this importance of the role and your leadership. Cloud native data platforms break down those silos that drive everybody crazy in organizations at executive levels. It's going to provide the real-time insights, enabling people for smarter decisions. Let's face it, companies want to run in real time. And cloud native, for the first time, really, along with the AI, is going to provide this unique capability. But the CIO has to ensure that data trust and the governance of what is going on. So it's an expansion of just having the data, but it's more about that strategic use of it. So the operating model for continuous innovation is we are shifting from a project mentality to a product mentality, all right? Embedded AI in all digital workflows. Automation is going to drive that speed and resilience, and we're going to have far more faster experimentation and faster scaling than we've ever had before. Okay, so I have set right now the framing of this from an executive point of view and a business point of view. I'm now going to turn it over to Parag for a lot more of the details, technically and infrastructure-wise, of how this is going to run.
Fantastic. Thank you, Art. As always, it's a tough act to follow after Art, so I'm going to do my best. But just by the way of introduction, Parag Karnik, CTO Enterprise Platforms. In my role, I get to talk to many customers, prospects, partners, and be able to bring in my industry experiences. As last 3 decades, I had the privilege of working across the Fortune 100 industries, Credit Suisse, UBS, Johnson & Johnson, as well as Express Scripts, which is now part of Cigna. So I bring in the highly regulated industries perspectives to make the platforms to be able to provide solutions that help solve your business priorities. The business outcomes is what really the focus of our offerings and value is, and I get to shape that with your insights. Given that, I'm going to start simplistically in terms of today's transformation, as Art laid out, it's at many levels. And we all have gone through many different versions of technology changes over the years. And today's unprecedented times really require us, I'm going to use the phrase, back to basics. So how do you continue to innovate and transform your business in an agile manner at the speed of your business needs? And to start that thought process, let's just define what cloud native really means at the highest level. As I stated, in today's day and age, to stay competitive, as part of your business stakeholders, you need to be able to really responsive. And that responsiveness requires agility. And that agility requires you to be able to provide the speed that's unmatched so that you can stay competitive. You can go create new revenue models. You can go after mergers and acquisitions in a more efficient manner. And most importantly, AI. How do you really drive AI to your advantage? How do you go towards real gains in terms of productivities and efficiencies? All of that requires a fail-fast and iterative agile approach, because forget not, right? These technologies are new and they continue to evolve. And I love Malcolm Gladwell's perspective that the Industrial Revolution did not start on the day when the wheel or spinning wheel was invented. It took decades, it took years to be able to get to the steam engine phase, to be able to get to the pulleys, to be able to drive some of the modernization aspects. And after decades worth of those effects, that technology was matured and you got Industrial Revolution. And that's exactly what's happening with AI at an unanticipated and ever-evolving phase. And what we strongly believe and what we see when I meet across multiple customers across the globe, that enterprises are sooner than later going to come to an inflection point where AI is going to be part of your business critical applications. And in order to be able to deliver the promise of the technology in an agile and iterative way, you need to be modular from architecture perspective. You need to be able to improve the developer experience with the velocity that can help them match the demands. It also needs to be matched the scalability demands, right? We're talking about agentic AI. So think about decision making that's taking from humans to agents. And again, this is not a topic of replacing humans, but it's really about how do you provide that decision support system and how do you, with right appropriate controls, provide the aspect of driving the agentic revolution or evolution as we go through. So it's all about providing that resilience, it's providing that scalability in a secure and compliant manner. And that's really the premise of being cloud native, because that's where microservices, modular business capabilities that can stay independent with a lightweight orchestration. And that's really where you have an agile and infrastructure agnostic capability, which is called as cloud native. Right? So at the highest level, cloud native needs to be defined that helps you match the innovation speed with a fail-fast approach to experiment and to be able to get to market at a speed that matches your business needs. Given that, is slight comparison for you to think about the classic, right? That's a politically better word than legacy as an example, but the classic implementations that we have all seen, which used to be monolith applications, right? It will take 30 days of QA cycles to be able to do regression testing to test one small capability, because anything and everything can be broken or restated if you don't follow the application development that goes on for 6 months and you're doing a release, or even if you're going for a monthly or semi-monthly release. That has changed with cloud native. And that's really where the technology comes in, where the aspects of these modular business capabilities that match to the technical capabilities that you provide, and together they provide a construct of a smaller implementation that can be changed on demand and that can be tested in terms of some of the market dynamics that you may want to influence to change. The architecture is also moving from more centralized to more distributed. right? And as soon as you think about distributed, we have all seen the move from centralized architectures to distributed. It comes with its own challenges. And as soon as you talk about distributed, you also need to think about the business critical aspect in terms of business continuity, right? How are you thinking about failovers? How are you thinking about highly active type of implementations? What type of RTO and RPO that your business requires to be able to provide that continuity of services? All of those considerations are critically important. And those don't change from the previous days of monolith applications to the newer days of cloud native, right? Those considerations are still important. But what cloud native really does is it gives you the built-in redundancy and self-healing capabilities. That's key for us to understand. When you shift from a traditional architecture to a cloud native architecture, you're going to be now counting on the built-in redundancy and self-healing. And to take a step into a little bit of a technical aspect, these are not just fancy words, right? So the whole cloud native construct is based on containers as a deployment mechanism. So you put your application logic, you put all the dependencies on a container, anything and everything that application needs. As soon as you did that, now you can stand on your own. And what Kubernetes does is provides a orchestration layer for this particular stateless mechanism as a business capability to be able to stand up. And then that business capability is going to be hit by thousands of hundreds and millions of users. And that's when the scalability of the information comes in, which is the next point that instead of the traditional approach of being reactive for your infrastructure to scale up, now what the Kubernetes orchestration does is provides your dynamic and auto-scaling efficiencies. Right? So Kubernetes construct started with Google, and Google did that as the Bark project back in the days, where they required significant amount of scaling, which required for them to be proactive to satisfy the internet growth and the search and the ads campaigns and everything else that goes on the internet activity. You had to have a scalable architecture. So Bark was a way for them to manage that specific demand. And when that was open source, that's when Kubernetes construct came in, and that bypassed the Docker-based orchestration, which was prevalent back then, and now that has been taken over. Right? So concepts-wise, it's important to understand, and that's where I have the next slide. As part of cloud native, there are these layers which also are referred to at the higher level. Microservices, which are your business capabilities in a modular format that can stand on its own. They can be further orchestrated. Containers are lightweight. They consist anything and everything your application logic is going to require, including all the dependencies. It's self-contained. Right? Think about no wordplay or no pun, but that's really where the word container is important because it has everything that application requires. No more dependencies, no more other libraries and other things that you need to think about, including think about your C programming days and the type of compiler errors you would get when you would compile a C program that you did not include certain libraries and other things, right? That's what container takes it away. And then the API construct is important because that's really where between the different business services to interact with each other, that's where the APIs allow a microservice, which is a business capability A, to talk to business capability B based on the business flow, process flow, to be able to orchestrate that logic. But at the same time, those capabilities are self-healing, self-leaving, and they can be constructed on demand, which is where the underlying orchestration again that comes in, where the Kubernetes layer comes in, right? So Kubernetes, once again, it's an orchestration layer that takes care of all of your infrastructure complexities. APIs allow different business capabilities to talk to each other, so that you're able to orchestrate the business logic. And containers is a way to encapsulate anything related to your business logic to be within self-contained within that container, right? Those are the four pillars of the overall architecture. When you think about this technical implementation, and I'm also going to keep this discussion at a higher level to the audiences on this particular session, and it's tailored towards C-suite. Whether you're C-suite or you're talking to C-suite, that's really where this discussion becomes important, because ultimately, it's never about technologies. It's always about what business value that you create and what do you drive in terms of business outcomes. So when you put that lens on the cloud native applications, you have to bring in the AI context. So why we continue to talk about containers and Kubernetes every single time, and they have kind of become ubiquitous when you think about AI. And the reason is a lot of the polls and studies and research that's showing us that the container adoption will significantly increase with AI. Because most, and that's with the number from Gartner, about 75% of all AI and ML implementations are within containers, right? And think about the growth. Back in 2024, just less than 2 years, we were at just less than 50%. So the hockey stick growth as part of this evolution that continues is phenomenal. And when you think about the construct, the 4 pillars of architecture, think about what's changing on the infrastructure side. Think about what's changing on your deployment side. Think about what's changing from security, compliance, and overall governance perspective. And that's really where you need to be aware of this significant pivotal point that's coming in the transformation journey, where the containers are going to bypass or surpass the pure monolith applications that are sitting in something like a VM-based implementation or a traditional physical machine implementation. The second data point is also about, as much as it's easy for us to say, hey, Kubernetes takes care of all of the scaling aspects, whether it's horizontal scaling or vertical scaling, behind the scenes, the devil is in the details. Because what Kubernetes really does, it encapsulates all of the infrastructure complexities, and it basically provides a mechanism to be able to scale horizontally or vertically based on your architecture, which is where your compute, your storage, your networking, all of those layers. Within Kubernetes construct, it has something called as CSI drivers, as an example, that goes to the storage level. Kubernetes has something called as CNI drivers that talk to the networking aspects. So combination all of these internal constructs really drive the resource optimization on demand so that you provide the efficiency of scalability based on that dynamic demand that your business is going to require. Okay. And we want to talk a little bit more about what that means too. But just think about what Kubernetes is doing and why that's an important consideration for all of you to have to make the AI dream a reality. The other thing what we see, when you go from a traditional IT, and you may have a question, hey, I'm perfectly fine. I'm doing monthly release cycles, releases. I have a deployment CI/CD pipeline already. My developer experience is fantastic. Why do I need to switch to containers? So while you're doing good, you can always go from good to great. And the reason I state that is a lot of studies with actual enterprises adopting to container-based implementation is showing that when you go from traditional IT, no matter what level of maturity you are, you're going to increasingly get the efficiencies, and that gives you the ability to do more with less. That's the key point. All of the construct of lightweight business capabilities development with infrastructure encapsulation that manages self-healing, high availability, horizontal or vertical scaling, it requires you, or it gives you the ability to be able to be more efficient. You're taking many of the things away that otherwise you'll have to do manually. And that's really where the deployment velocity goes through a hockey stick growth, where you can be up to 90% efficient. That's what these research and surveys are showing us. So what could be some of the use cases, right? All of this is great. So we as executives, we always want to think about what are the actual solutions where we can apply. right? So, and many of you represent various industries. So this is just a sample. If I think about my financial services context, um, you would not be competitive if you don't provide a digital experience to your customers, right? And digital experience goes beyond payments or credit cards. It goes towards executing your trade transactions, your mutual funds, your mortgages, your various wealth management, asset management, retail banking vehicles that you need to be able to manage behind the scenes to provide that unified customer 360 experience with a mobile app. That's where many banking industry or FSI enterprises have gone towards microservices type of implementation. Because when you're serving that singleton experience through one single app, you cannot think about deploying that app on a monthly basis. That is a monolith application. And that's really where different maturities, different development cycles, they get modularized within a container as a platform. And now that application is able to bring the reality to you in terms of what you're delivering, right? So that's the realistic implementation when you think about some of the industry specific use cases. E-commerce, look at what's going on in terms of different acquisitions, among other things too. And that's really where the brick and mortar and how do you drive still using internet and personification of your needs to be able to get towards driving the traffic in the store, because that's where you're going to make up some margins, among other things too, and you're going to get the customer to buy other things. Various models have evolved, right? You can buy something on the internet, you can return something on a store closer to you. And that's really where the whole e-commerce phenomenon, based on the marketing campaigns and other things that happen, is completely unpredictable, right? While you can manage the seasonalities, whether it's Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever it is, there are different campaigns, there are different trends. Think about social media, what's happening there, and how the influencers are driving the personal experiences. That's completely unpredictable, right? How some of the millennials are responding to this is completely unpredictable. And that's really where you need the scale, you need the efficiency, you need the ability to innovate at a speed of business to stay competitive. And that's where retail implementations are very, very significantly advancing with container type of implementations. And ultimately, it's not real unless you're able to look at real-time data. So real-time data, and I've seen many telecom examples as an example, are some of the e-commerce examples where you're looking at millions of transactions per second. I'm going to state that again, millions of transactions per second. How do you have the observability? How do you have the performance? How do you have the efficiencies? How do you manage the infrastructure at scale, whether you're on-premise, whether you're cloud, whether you're on hybrid journey, whether you have edge deployments, really doesn't matter. The use cases are spanning across every single system and implementation that you can think of. And that's really where some of these use cases you need to think about from your industry and domain perspective. What's the applicability? And how do I better suit this technology for further implementation? Given that context, I want to shift into it's good to talk about cloud native. It's great to talk and start your AI journey, but what is really required at an enterprise level? No matter how small or how large your enterprise is, these considerations stay consistent. As part of that, you also need to understand where some of the challenges for the enterprises are coming from. So for example, if you have full stack developers who are managing a mobile experience with UI, to a application logic that executes the business processes, to using data behind the scenes, and are called out in terms of the criticality of data and related data quality and governance processes. Ultimately, any and all applications always depend on either stateless or stateful data. And that's really where the developers should be focused on delivering the business capabilities. Kubernetes is a great construct. Containers is a great construct because it provides flexibility to developers. But do you really want your developers to look at business continuity aspects, the security aspect, the compliance aspects to be built in within every microservice that they're developing? The answer is no. You need to have a architecture that has a platform where you can plug in the business capabilities, and by inherent design of this architecture, you're able to experience the security, the compliance, the regulatory aspects, the business continuity aspects, where developers are free to innovate for your business demands. You cannot ask them to be able to consider, you can go across 1,200 plus a CNCF compliant open source projects if that's what you want to do, but that's going to require a significant scale, not just to initially deploy your open source based projects, it's also going to require you to lifecycle manage all of those open source innovations. Do you really want to introduce to your developers to do patch management across your containers in Kubernetes open source implementations? Can you do that? Absolutely, you can do that. That's what open source is for. And I'm a big proponent of open source. Open source comes with very specific enterprise level safety levels and other mechanisms to be able to do correctly. At the same time, if you provide a platform to your developers that takes care of the back to basics fundamentals, you can still use the innovation of open source by bringing in those components which are really going to drive your business adoption. But behind the scenes, the platform is going to give you the capabilities in terms of what it needs to provide. Always think about that. The other aspects, many of the organizations are situated in terms of or aligned towards the line of business. And many organizations or enterprises have very different domain expertise required to be able to deliver within those organizational constructs. What I've really seen is developers having a line of business expertise. And those expertise vary by the line of business, that no matter if you're in a bank or if you're in a life sciences organization, you're in a healthcare organization, right? There are different business functions that are provided. So the application developers are very specific to that domain knowledge. Kubernetes, without thinking correctly from a platform perspective, now if you give the ability and control to these various stacks of developers, which are line of business specific, all of a sudden, you're going to have a different challenge in terms of siloed deployments, the configuration drift, the standardization challenges that you're going to see. And ultimately, it's going to go down to increasing the costs and efficiencies. Most importantly, it's going to change your security posture. Right? Not every developer is made the same. There's no one size fits all. And that's why you need to provide them a platform capability in terms of Kubernetes construct for them. Again, gonna keep them sound like a broken record. Go back to innovation and developing those business capabilities. The data aspects is critically important too. You increasingly going to need persistent data storage, and that's really where, if you think about it, gone the days of just Oracles and SQLs or MySQLs. Now you have Postgres databases, you have Cassandras, you have Mongo, you have CockroachDB. You have anything and everything that's available to you that goes from a traditional relational database all the way down to object databases or graph databases to that nature, right? What's happening with the AI in terms of RAG and vector databases is an important aspect to think about. But ultimately, at the lowest level, any type of database is a mechanism that sits on top of data. Data sits on top of storage. And that's why, how do you expose the persistent data to containers? What level of IOPS that you provide? What are the varying levels of QoS requirements that you have, right? That's where the efficiency and other aspects start coming in. So how do you provide a performance storage layer that varies based on different business needs so that you have a equitable cost and efficiency scale to be able to operate at an enterprise level? And there are multiple vendors, right? So how do you find synergies across each of these vendors? And those are the challenges that you need to think about when you're going for enterprise level applications. Given that construct, right? These are at the highest level, the 5 must-haves. These are non-negotiables, right? How do you think about security in terms of hardening and compliance at enterprise grade, right? That absolutely a must-have, non-negotiable. How do you provide flexible infrastructure? What's your stateful and stateless architecture, right? That's what level of volumes you're going to be able to manage. What are the partnerships, right? In terms of some of the, we all operate in the ecosystem. There is no rip and replace. There is no one platform. There is no one vendor that you can use when it comes to enterprise scale, no matter what level of cloud expertise that you may also have, right? There is always never a one vendor approach when it comes to larger implementations. And that's why you always need to be aware of the overall ecosystem that we operate on and how does that continue to evolve as you go through towards a containers and Kubernetes architecture. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the context of AI. And the last and most important aspect, and which is what I called out in the beginning as back to basics, change management, communications. It has to be crystal clear in terms of bringing that alignment from your stakeholders and to be able to have the training, the understanding, the awareness of the technology. So how are you thinking about your ITSM processes? How are you thinking about your asset management from CMDB when you have immutable infrastructure aspects with Kubernetes that's coming in, that's self-healing? What that means is Kubernetes will restart a cluster on its own when it requires, when it detects a fault. That's the self-healing aspect. But behind the scene, what just happened is that Kubernetes orchestration layer just spun up a brand new environment. If you're operating in a regulated environment, how do you put that construct into CMDB so that you are able to provide traceability for your auditors? Think about the dynamic aspects of what this technology is doing. And that's why when you go through a very specific aspect of cloud native enablement of your enterprise, there is no one size fits all. There is no big bang approach. So what we have all seen, and I'm hoping I'm preaching to the choir, is you got to start small. And in order for you to start small, you need to look at your overall portfolio. What is your business demand translating to? What are your business stakeholders screaming? What are the board expectations? Where are you within the industry? What are your priorities? And that's going to help you identify a set of finite applications. Those finite applications, then you need to think about business criticality and other levers and break it down into microservices. And then you need to have all the construct. You don't become cloud native by using a public cloud. You don't become cloud native just by having a fantastic, mature private cloud implementation. You also need to have some of the enablement processes, like you may need to have your automated code deployments with CI/CD pipelines. You may have infrastructure as code constructs like Terraforms, Ansibles. I'm not promoting any products here. I'm just using some of the most common things that we continue to see. But bottom line, you gotta have a continuous integration, continuous deployment, qualified environment within your infrastructure that allows the developers to be able to choose a target and deploy their code. And behind the scenes, that's going to trigger off all of the quality and all of the stage gates and other processes, including the updates to your CMDB and everything else. That has to be there. And you cannot think of cloud native without enabling those processes. We all been on save one calls, right? Midnight, that phone has rung, or back in the days, the beepers used to ring. When you're experiencing an outage, what level of observability that you have across this environment? What type of proactive actions you can take? Can you get to a nirvana stage of a storage disk, if you have any at this time in terms of solid state devices, but a sub-performance storage layer before it causes a database laydown that gives you a customer experience related outage, that our systems are running slow, I don't know what's going on, right? You don't want to tell that to somebody who's sitting on an e-commerce or a mobile app waiting for that experience in the spinning wheel construct. So can you be proactive? And the answer is, in today's age of AI-enabled observability, that we are not far from that reality. But the basic constructs of observability have to be in place. The construct of Google SRE, site reliability engineering, is very important part of a cloud native organization design, because that's really where you drive continuous improvement and you really look at the overall aspect of measured differentiation that you're going to do, right from infrastructure to your operational to your development layer, to be able to drive that modernization and innovation. And it's all about that monitoring aspects. I've used in my past customer journeys. Customer journeys is a fantastic mechanism that you're not staring at a dashboard and trying to make out of what these metrics mean. Customer journeys give you a real-time business capability experience that directly relates to your customer experience, and it gives you an overall layer in terms of different microservices, what's their performance, what is happening, what has changed over time, and where you need to focus on, right? So when you're thinking about cloud native, you need to worry about all of these various constructs within an ecosystem to make it real and make it matter, right? So those are the basic steps. You don't go overnight. You have a plan, you put a vision, you go iteratively, you have a fail-fast approach, you become agile, you take corrective actions, but most importantly, you enable your teams and improve their skill set. You need to bring them along the journey. And in today's days of talent and retention and worries about AI taking jobs away, there is significant amount of work that still needs to be done, where there are significant opportunities available for everybody to be able to go into that modernization journey. So I set the context in terms of what cloud native means at the highest level. What's the distinction from a containers and Kubernetes aspects compared to the previous classic constructs of monolith applications, talk a little bit about data and other things. But ultimately, what Art was alluding to, all of this modernization and transformation is there, but at the same time, you still need to run your business. You still need to keep the lights on. The capital, as an annual cycle, in many cases you have, not a lot of organizations have gone towards the agile capital funding cycle. Many of them have, which is great. But no matter what it is, the capital comes at a cost. And that cost is really going to drive your total cost of ownership. And more importantly, it's going to drive return on investment. So that capital that you require to modernize your business is going to come at a cost. So how do you still manage budget cuts, which is impacting your run budget as an example? How do you still use capital in a creative manner to be able to deliver for the business? At the same time, you still need to address your technical debt. And bottom line, you still need to continue to innovate to stay competitive. When you think about that operational model, what's also happening from boardroom perspective is, do you have a dual vendor strategy? In today's day and age, in the political aspects, geopolitical aspects that we live in, anything can happen, right? How are you protecting our business? What's your business de-risk strategy? And that's why concentration risk keeps coming out to be a significant worry for many of the boardroom discussions. How are you, Mr. CIO or CTO or CXO, protecting from any of the disruptions that could happen? That could be price increases, that could be unplanned budget implications, that could be a leverage that you don't have in certain contractual negotiations in terms of vendor choices. It could be a third-party risk in terms of, let's say, a payment gateway or third-party provider in terms of health insurance aspects that could go haywire, could have a security risk. Ultimately, it's your business that's getting impacted. So how are you, as a CXO, protecting your business? That's where concentration risk can manifest in many different ways. Cyber resilience, right? The world we live in, the technology advances is also a disadvantage in terms of what's available out there in the world. And that's why the encryption aspects are in future quantum mechanics and other things that are going to come through. So we need to be able to also improve the security posture, because we are all aware it's not a question of if, it's a question of when the cyber resilience or vulnerability aspects come through, and how do we want to manage your business to be able to stay ahead of everything that we're talking about, right? To be able to have that resilient posture. Again, gone the days of going to cloud or having AI. The question now is really about value. What is the value of my cloud investment? What is the value of AI? Can I go beyond a chatbot? Can I go beyond actually some level of knowledge aspects that this particular agent is bringing to me, which is great, right? But those are table stakes. What are the real business use cases that are driving the productivities and efficiencies? What are the new revenue models the AI has helped building? What are the process level optimizations where I'm able to change my operating margins, where I'm able to stay relevant in terms of my top line growth as to what I'm doing? That's where value of AI and cloud is coming in question. Right? So I wanted to put that out there because cloud native is not just a technology discussion. It's a business solution that we want to bring to the table in the context of everything else you as a C-suite leader that you need to develop and build. And when that happens, right? So in my experience, I have so much going on. I need to keep the lights on. I have these business partners yelling at me in terms of you're too slow, you're too expensive. I have these multiple strategies that I need to deliver across the enterprises. I really don't have time for even attempting something new if it's not broken, right? If it's not broken, I'm not going to mess with it. So how do you, as a CXO, still keep that leadership dimension? Because forget not, you are the technical expert when it comes to boardroom. They're going to all look at you. I remember one of my discussions at a previous company at board level, the way the board member demonstrated or demanded my delivery or business outcomes, that he was like, Parag, you are the custodian of shareholder value. I want you all to reflect on that, custodians of shareholder value. That comes with a significant responsibility that's sitting on your broad shoulders. So then you're struggling with why should I attempt something new? At the same time, your business is requiring to innovate at a faster rate. You have talent retention challenges. You have budget constraints. You cannot sacrifice quality in terms of reliability, resiliency, or anything else, because every minute you're going to spend on an outage call, you and your teams, that's taking you away from you innovating for your business. How do you stay compliant in changing regulatory landscape, no matter what planet you are and which landscape you're addressing? How do you continue to improve your security posture? How do you manage your partner expectations, right? Because how do you educate them in terms of technology is great, but let me show you what it really means to implement it. And ultimately, the most important aspect that you as a CXO that you're always concerned about is not the technical abilities, it's the value the technology or any solution that brings to the table. So how do you address that value equation, right? And that's where I want to switch the gears and I want to address the value aspect as my last slide. But before I do that, to summarize from cloud native perspective at a C level, right? So now you understand the basics, the architecture consideration, the infrastructure implications, the expectations of developers, the changes from a traditional development to a modern development. So cloud native does not equate purely to public cloud. Cloud native is really about, I use the acronym down below. If you look at it, it's called as primed. Cloud native is a architecture that enables you to have a programmable, resilient, immutable, modular, elastic, and declarative approach of providing technology services to your businesses. Primed, programmable, resilient, immutable, modular, elastic, declarative. And that's why I'm aggressive in using the word saying cloud native doesn't equate public cloud. It's also applied to your private cloud. It's also applied to your edge, because the enterprises that you all live in and we make use of, you have this hybrid approach that you have to maintain. And that's where the need in terms of managing at a platform level becomes so increasingly important for you to have all these considerations in place, because you're really, really looking at a very heterogeneous landscape and a very different level of skill set. So think about that as an approach. In the advent of from AI perspective, right, what you're going to see is, yeah, we started the AI journey, but in order for you to get to an agentic AI, right, that's the Nirvana stage where you have human assisted or human supervised implementations at some level, but you're really going to have some autonomous agents to really drive the value of AI. Ultimately, it all comes down to what is an AI implementation? It's an application deployment that's using an LLM, or in future, or in some cases now, it could be using a small language model, which could be SLM. Enterprises are going to require to have a choice of different language models, small or large. So how do you maintain the versioning? How do you manage the vulnerability? How do you manage the drift detection? How do you manage everything that goes around the aspects of managing a business critical AI implementation? And you may say, I'm not there today, I'm just doing a pilot, but this is the time to take a step back and think about, what does the North Star look like? And how do you take your organization where you sit today to that North Star in a stepwise, controlled, disciplined approach to be able to get to cloud native, to be able to enable AI within your organization? You need to understand that in order for you to deliver the promise of the new technology, you need to go back to the basics. You need to think about audit and security requirements. Can I think within the organization and demonstrate who accessed what model, what data, at what point in time? Can I recreate? Can I trace back to that particular change now that we are seeing this, some type of drift that's detected? Can I be proactive in terms of managing that drift? What level of observability do I have? And we're going from databases to unstructured data to data lakes, data oceans, and whatever else that's going to continue to happen in this world, right? It's exploding at a rate that's beyond anything that we have seen at this point in time, which is where a disciplined approach is required, and it cannot be reactive, it has to be planned. So given that, while it may appear as complex, what do AI factories really require, right? So ultimately, you need to think about your standard compute storage network is also going to require what NVIDIA calls as accelerated computing, or GPUs. Google has a different concept or different approach, TPUs. Intel and AMD are starting to come up and gain ground in terms of providing these GPU capabilities. Amazon has its own chipsets, and there are many more that are going to continue to develop. So ultimately, the entire infrastructure play is changing at a very rapid pace. But ultimately, you really need an orchestration layer that manages all of these complexities, because unless you're in providing infrastructure business, you cannot keep up pace with the level of innovation that's happening to be able to make those innovations available to your application developers. So you need an orchestration layer that encapsulates all the infrastructure complexities at the pace of modernization that going through. And then on top of that orchestration layer, you need a cloud native platform, what we talked about. And then you can provide a self-service portal based on multi-tenancy and other enterprise aspects that you may want to worry about to be able to really provide that infrastructure on demand, at the point and at the speed of business capabilities that you need to continue to deliver. Right? That's what AI factories require. Given that consideration, what you're really going to have is not just containers. We talked about containers, we talked about cloud native, but it's not just containers. It's the databases, the data lakes, the data oceans, it's the different models, it's different MCP and other protocols that are going to continue to evolve for agentic communications, right? It's a very complex landscape that you need to think about what you want to enable for your enterprise. And that way, what we can recommend as an approach, that you need to have your lines or your sights on providing a private or public AI within your perimeter. That's very important from data perspectives, from IP perspective. There's also a notion of sovereign cloud that's coming up, which is very correct based on data privacy and data classification requirements. So we're going to live in this hybrid world. So you really need to think about, as much as you can use public cloud, there are certain aspects of data you may want to entertain as a hybrid landscape, and which is where your private cloud implementation, your edge, needs to be also modernized, and it cannot be just left behind. AI as a technology is going to continue to evolve, and that's really where you need to provide the flexibility and choice. You cannot just attach to one platform and be able to just continue to offer that platform. How do you use that platform to enable multiple language models? Today, on Hugging Face, there are 1.8 million models, and that are continue to grow at an accelerated pace. Tomorrow, there may be 2 million plus. Think about the explosion of Java and what happened and what certain providers came back in terms of licensing implications. If you have configuration drift and it's not managed, not controlled, now with a specific mechanism, how are you going to manage the explosive growth that's going to happen for your business critical applications? And how do you restrict those application developers, data scientists, to use very specific, curated, vulnerability assessment completed type of model so that you're not exposing your enterprise to any undue risk? That's where a pure play platform that's important, that gives the flexibility of choice, but within guardrails. And then you need to empower your technology developers and other business stakeholders to be able to do it at scale. And that's really where all the scaling considerations that we talked about, that Kubernetes and other constructs that provide to you, you need to have a platform mentality to be able to assess and accept. Right? So use AI to your advantage, and you need to be able to think about driving your digital core. Your core has to be digital for you to be able to enable the power of AI. So modernization is going to have that fundamental basic to be able to drive, which is where your architecture, your reference architecture, your back to basics in terms of operations, your considerations in terms of ITSM, you're thinking in terms of CMDB, you're thinking in terms of security, compliance, and regulatory controls. All of that comes together as an ecosystem for you to provide an AI advantage to your business. And ultimately, I said we'll talk about value. So I'm almost out of time. Value is the most important aspect. And this is one way. There are many different frameworks that are available, but something that I've used in the past is a 3E framework, is efficiency, which is hard dollars, effectiveness, and experience, which are soft dollars. So you can think about it, the value realization in terms of direct and indirect, and that's really where the 3E framework is effective in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, and experience. And you can go out of based on the derived value, you need to put in the context of what efficiencies I'm getting by breaking down the silos or providing better security posture. You have to think about effectiveness in terms of improving reliability and resiliency of your platform. And you can think of experience as a dimension to be able to provide the experience that's vital for you to stay competitive. People are not going to use your app or not go to your store or not use your bank if you continue to provide, oh, you got to do this manually, or this functionality is not available. We don't have time in the day. We need functionality at the fingertips. We don't have the patience anymore to look at a screen that's spinning. And that's really where, from impact perspective, when you're talking to the CFOs, you need to be able to demonstrate the investment that you're needing to modularize or do the digital transformation by modernizing your core. That's the most important aspect. But CFO is not going to understand the technical terms, which is where you need to demonstrate the value, and you need to provide the value in terms of KPIs and levers that map to these 3 dimensions or any other framework that you could use to be able to have a very specific conversation with your CFO. So with that, there's no better person other than Art to be able to talk about his experiences in terms of bringing this to closure and how you should think about some of these frameworks to take it to the next level and have that conversation that's going to help you enable your modernization journey. Thank you for your time, Really appreciate it and looking forward to the Q&A. Art?
Okay, well, thanks. Very informative, Parag. And now the point is, what does this ultimately mean to you? What does it mean to your career? What are some of the trends that are going on? It can almost seem overwhelming, all of the things that are happening, how quickly they are changing, and what is that role, not so much today, but where is it going to go? So let's first start with this concept that very much is out there, which is risk, security, and responsible AI. And I think what you're going to see here, and we see it already, is that the issues of risk and crime and protection are making their way into the same role of the data and taking care of things. In other words, security and everything else that we've talked about are coming closer together. So the first thing is what does that mean to your role? Is it that the CISOs and the CIOs are coming in? We know that security is no longer going to be a perimeter issue, right? As Parag talked about, this is about every time you roll out an application, all right, or what I call a Lego part, all right, security has to be designed in. It has to be bolted in there. So the first thing is, well, now I've got to be very much involved with security issues in the design of the software itself, as opposed to what in the past has been, I just got to build a perimeter around it and I've done my job. How do you protect sensitive data and IP in a different way than the regular stuff? In other words, how do you really, what is that strategy? And how do you govern AI bias, which is how is this data coming up with what it's coming up with, and explainability, which is how did you get to the decisions, and the regulations that are going on between the EU and the US and China and all of these things. And ultimately, all of that, trust is going to be a competitive differentiator in what you're doing, if you can deal with those kinds of things. So my sense is, whether it's the CISO or the CIO, I think those roles are coming closer together and we're beginning to see it in different ways. So think of your role in the future of how security and your knowledge of that and how it comes together. And I've seen it go in both ways. I've seen CISOs reporting to CIOs. I've seen CIOs becoming CISOs. There's a lot of issues there that are coming together. Economics of AI and cloud, I want to be careful here, because if you go forward and you own all of the dollars, that's a tough place to be. I think what you want to be able to do is discuss these things in terms of risk factors and going at AI investments must scale efficiently. That means you've got to be working very close with the financial people. FinOps, links in cloud will add certainly a lot of business value. But transparency of course usage and ROI are going to be critical. And the CIO must enable that sustainable innovation. And remember this, ultimately the decision of how much to invest, how much risk is going to be made by other people. And I think that you need to create those relationships with those people at the board level, at the finance area, and also talk about what your competitors are doing. Another analogy that people give me, if you've ever watched a long distance race, there are three kinds of runners. There's the runner that's out in front trying to get away from the other group and just outlast them. And then there's the runner that's all the way in at the end, and unless they come up very quickly, may not be able to catch up. And then there's most of the runners are in the middle. And what they're doing is they're staying back to conserve their strength and see how things play out, but close enough to have a strong kick to win the race. And that's the analogy I want you to think about with economics. You want to demonstrate that, and allow the people at the board level and executive management with you to make decisions on how aggressive they want to be, and also always think about what your competitors are doing. Are they ahead? Are they behind? Think about that on a regular basis. AI, at the end of the day, it's become a business capability. It'll be embedded in every function, and it won't be isolated to any teams. That hits upon your leadership. All right? These are self-service platforms with guardrails. You're going to have faster product launches, and most of these, if not all of them, will be led by business innovations and abilities to scale. What does that mean? Well, forgetting about all the infrastructure things you have to do, you have to be there in the business all the time, which means organizationally, you have to think about how you free yourself up to be visible in what you're doing, all right? And have the necessary technical people that can run these operations for you so that you can be advocating for what ultimately is accelerated obsolescence. This is just the beginnings of these things, and they're going to have limited life. So you need to be spending some period of your time thinking about tomorrow, all right, and reacting to it, because planning is almost impossible these days, right? We don't really know where we're going to be. What does that all mean? Well, there's a whole revolution going on in talent and culture for this new AI-based enterprise, which is really what I'm calling it. Scarce AI and cloud skills are really something you need to build, right? In strategic assets, cross-functional teams. We know they outperform silos. What is the talent mix, not just within technology, but in the entire firm, right? Partners accelerate capability building. And what does partners mean? Are they consultants, employees, third parties? And how do you create a culture of learning and experimentation? And let me really hit on this, all right? The bottom line is, no matter how you look at it, there's never been a business research article that said people love change in an organization. And what am I telling you? We're in a world of accelerated change. How do you become that leader? So the CIO executive mandate, which is competing in this AI era, is to reshape growth, productivity, and competitiveness. Cloud native is a foundation to scale that AI. There's no question that technology is a board level growth. And I think you're going to see much more of this as we go forward. And again, that accountability, speed, trust, value. So I hope that we've been provocative, and I know that we're going to have some time for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was quite an overview, and it brought in a few questions that we'll go through. But one of the questions I think kind of leads to one of the things that we see here at Solutions Review, and it is this paradox where it feels like the world is changing so quickly that it is almost creating a paralysis among decision makers as to what to do, because ultimately the next best thing may be right around the corner. And so they've in fairness, they've invested for decades in legacy systems. And so, many enterprises, to get to the question, struggle with legacy systems, platforms, sprawl, inconsistent governance. What pragmatic steps can leaders take to begin this modernization incrementally, so as to get out of that, state of suspended animation that they may be in right now? How do they begin the journey toward real proper, what I would call proper digital transformation, as opposed to kind of what everybody's been, getting in around the edges?
I can start, and Art, if you can add, that'll be great too. What I've always seen in my experience, you got to find one business partner and understand their challenges and be able to give a helping hand to start small to be able to show or demonstrate ROI in terms of what business capability that they're not able to deliver today, that modernization will enable them to. It's a crawl, walk, run approach. And I also believe in show and tell, right? So if you're able to put not just your value proposition, but your value proposition with a success with your business partners, two peas in a pod, and that goes a long way for the organization to realize what you just did. And now you're going to have different stakeholders lining up. In order for, again, it's better said than done. It's your homework, your understanding of technical debt, understanding your technology capabilities, understanding your tools, understanding your team skills. All of that is important. But really what works in my experience is starting small, identifying that one stakeholder rather than boiling the ocean, creating the base case in terms of what you're not able to do today, what you will be able to do tomorrow, and then be able to show with measurable improvements in terms of how you achieved with full transparency. And that really is a nirvana stage to be able to drive the enterprise level adoption. It's not easy, but it can be done.
We're going to be in the M&A world soon because the reality is the costs of this is going to have to be shared among many players. And we see that happening out there as technology companies are working closer with businesses. And I think that you're going to see a lot of private equity investments so that the risks are going to be shared, all right? Because in a global economy, things can change very quickly. The second one that I've touched upon, which I think is urgently important, is, we've done a lot of research on why certain companies seem to be better, or we call them digital companies. Why were they better? And the first round of that was, well, we'll change the organizational structure, and that'll make, and we saw this with the problems with GE Digital, right? It didn't work. And what we found in our research is that when we examined why digital companies were different and better to some extent in this area, was because the people were different. It didn't have anything to do with the structure, so to speak. It had to do with the way they understood how to use data, understood this new world that we're in. And that's where the generations of people coming in to firms that are, less generational and all legacy based is going to be a very critical piece to having the right skill sets that understand how this world is going to be working. So financing is going to have to be spread a little bit, which will enable these types of things. I think you're going to see increase in M&A, and you are. And I think you really have to take a look at how technology's leaders not only transform their own organizations, but transform the organization as a whole.
Well, and certainly what we see is that this is just non-negotiable. This is coming, and it's coming like a freight train. And so ultimately you have to get moving and begin to start some sort of transformation. One question that we have here is which parts of our operating model or governance framework would face the greatest strain if we attempted to scale cloud native practices across every team and business unit?
Basically incredibly important. And this is the fight that we have on what the street wants on stock price and what the realities are of building sustainable and good companies. And I think the Amazon story is a great story in that they made the right investments. We're now calling that the hockey stick growth plan. And what it all means is I think there has to be a rethinking of return on investment in the world of technology-led projects, all right? And because what's going to happen is you want to have more companies innovating, which you have, and you want the bigger companies to be able to survive. And it requires, I think, something that may be against what the street always wants. And how do you have that resiliency so that you have the time to build these platforms, to be able to create the infrastructure that's going to give you the returns that you're looking for?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And what would I would add is the constraints you're going to face are going to be on your operations side of the house. So how do you enable that organization to be digital ready? To Art's point, is where the challenge is going to be if you think about how you want to shift towards cloud natives. And what I've seen is, yes, you can provide training, but you also have to provide opportunities, and you have to show the vision in terms of what good looks like. Digital transformation does not mean that your job is going to go away. You're going to be able to do something differently, and you're going to add more skills to be able to do this more effectively as you go on. AI is your friend, and AI is your complementary tool in your aspect. So you need to embrace the modernization journey, and you need to be able to look into how you want to do it differently. So change management, training, some of the incentives and comp management aspect that also go on. But operations organization is most vulnerable based on the amount of change they're going to see to be able to manage it effectively. And thing is, it's also brownfield in many enterprises. You don't have the liberty to start greenfield. So how do you manage the two facets of the organization? And that's where the operational challenges become real. And you need to be able to have a very, very thoughtful approach as to how you're going to be able to solve for it.
You know, everybody who would enter into this sort of next level digital transformation is going to want to have measurement involved. So, one question is, what leading indicators, KPIs, would help us determine whether our cloud native modernization efforts are accelerating business value or slowing due to fragmentation or architectural drift?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've used a few KPIs in my past. So, for example, speed to market that can be measured, right? So velocity is important. And I believe Art said it earlier, there are multiple dimensions, and I would put it into speed, cost, and quality. You cannot sacrifice quality for speed. So you really need to look into your velocity. At the same time, you also need to look into your defect escape ratios, right? So that's an important measure. You also need to look into your ability, the responsiveness aspect when you talk about operation scalability and other things. So your MTBF, mean time between failures, is an important measure. Mean time to respond, MTTR, right, is also an important measure. Are we giving the right tools for you to be able to improve your responsiveness? You can think about cost of your investments per employee across an enterprise, right? So by providing efficiencies and productivities, that effective per unit cost, are you able to affect it? Because ultimately that goes towards your bottom line, right? Any efficiencies that you are able to do it. And the last thing I would also state is the ability for doing more with less. That also needs to be not just a qualitative approach, it needs to be a quantitative approach. And that's where you need to implement best practices like the site reliability engineering that I referred to earlier. And SRE is not just an element of infrastructure or operations, it's also available or to be implemented within development organization. So by having the ability for SREs to be able to continuously improve and measure performance, it's a great way of putting KPIs to be able to drive. And then with the maturity of SREs also comes in OKRs, right? And objectives and key. And that's where you need to be able to get to and be able to do that quarter over quarter to see the measurable effect.
Yeah, the final question with regard to some of the ones that we've received is around workloads, and the question is, as AI workloads become routine rather than exceptional, I think we would all agree that this is going to become an avalanche of an architectural challenge. Which cloud native architectural decisions today will most influence our ability to scale them safely, predictably, and in compliance with policy?
I would start, you got to have automation in place, right? So the way to address it, policy-based automation. And that's why the basics of infrastructure as code and policy-based automation go hand in hand to be able to get to that stage. It's also important as you look into different workloads, you have to understand and have a deployment strategy. So what you're really changing from a brownfield organization, you may want to put in your new infrastructure as a greenfield. And with very specific top-down approach, you can provide anything new that goes into greenfield and you contain your brownfield environment. And with that approach, you can start doing scalability that's required for seasonality and other aspects. That's entertained on the brownfield, but anything new that goes on greenfield. And now you start slowly but surely growing that environment at the level of business demand, driving that top-down initiative, which is where you will start seeing an inflection point coming in, where brownfield continues to reduce, your technical debt continues to get addressed, and you have measurable improvements within your greenfield advantage.
Art, I want to end with some advice from you, the sage, with regard to just simple business mindset here. I haven't seen anything like this, and I'm older. I've seen everything. I was, through the PC revolution, through the internet revolution, got into technology during the bubble, the first bubble in the early 2000s. I haven't seen anything like this, and so there is this sense of potential paralysis as you think maybe there's things coming around the corner that I haven't seen yet. There's certainly been a lot of investment, as you were mentioning, in new technologies and new solutions that haven't arrived. What would you give in terms of business advice for decision makers now, in terms of how bold to be, how thoughtful to be, how proactive to be? I mean, where should the executive level be thinking?
So what's happened, and this is a word that people don't like to hear, but it's certainly one that, and we haven't even spoken about quantum. All right. I mean, you ain't seen nothing yet. All right. So
we ain't seen nothing yet.
I'm extremely involved in those issues of quantum processing and other things, which are very much coming. But one of the things we've learned from this research going forward is that planning is becoming quite questionable. There's even people who tell you that successful people of the past, maybe they were lucky. And we live in a society that tends to look for best practices. And I think that's a danger. The people who are changing the world are not looking back on what worked in the past. I mean, there are a certain number of those. But Amazon, I mean, just to give you an example, I was brought up in a world, as probably both of you were, where be vertical. Don't be all over the place. If you're a healthcare company, be a healthcare company. Well, the joke out there is, what business is Amazon in? Well, whatever they want. And they started this platform concept. So if you would have been one of those people, and I'll criticize my own world of the MBA kind of world, you would have been seeking these best practices, which would have led you really to failure. So here's another thing. In 1998, there was a book published at Harvard, which was called Sense and Response. And you know what? It went out of print. And what it said was planning was over, and we are now in the world of sensing an opportunity and responding to it. And that everything will have a shorter life cycle. So the question becomes is, how do you look at something, let's say like Bill Gates did when he didn't have a browser, and he realized that that was a problem, and he told everybody to drop what you're doing and do this. And if you look at some historical entrepreneurial organizations, you do something, it has a limited life cycle, and you move on. And what we see in even in higher education is they won't do that. And that actually results, right, in many ways, in a situation where you're hanging on to something that really needs to move forward. So it's the metabolic rate of new things, all right, that is key. And the beauty of AI and all this other stuff is that it becomes, how do I reach and react to a preference in the business communities that if I can get there fast enough, I can get a market share, enjoy that value, but also recognize that its life cycle or S-curve is going to shrink. So we've called this the imagination era, right? Milton Friedman and all of them, I mean, they've all said this. That requires people to understand that you've got to keep reestablishing who and what you are. And for a lot of people, that doesn't come natural because we haven't taught it properly.
Well, and it's certainly going to be existential for some businesses and organizations. They just are not going to be able to respond to the moment, as you saw with Amazon and the cloud, and certainly all of the internet impact. So this is one of those moments where, you know, leaders need to be recognizing that they need to be bold, they need to be innovative, and they do need to begin to move toward this future that's coming. And again, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when and how quickly. So this was tremendous. Thank you very much, both of you, for the time today. I learned a lot. I hope our audience certainly learned a lot, and we would look forward to doing it again at some point in the future.
I'll kind of leave you with this. Remember something for our audience. Uber took a smartphone, took a satellite, right, and took Google Maps and changed the world of the way people sort of move around, right? They didn't own any of it. The view of AI, in my mind, in 6G, which is coming, and I'm working on that, is that AI will become ubiquitous. So it's going to be a question of how do people use it in a business world to capture market share. That's the name of the game. Not owning the IP. You don't need to do that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
Well, there you have it, a masterclass delivered. We want to thank Dr. Art Langer, Parag Karnik, and Nutanix for that presentation today, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.